Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones, and I'm excited to share more around what I've been focusing on recently. Very recently, I've been focusing on updating the journey that I guide women into based on some deeper clarity around my own unique philosophy of ancient medicinal truth, which is centered really around how I channel the remedies of the wild in order to energetically dose my women with healing remedies so that they can expand into the magic of who their souls came here to be. I'm really witnessing patterns that I've not seen previously with as much clarity about how my women tend to be born as the phosphoric remedy of the wild. And that's someone who is deeply sensitive, deeply magical and medicinal, and has this burning desire for more. Phosphorus is that kind of what's on the end of a match, so that's that big association with fire. And I'm also seeing how these magical women often get layered over with layers of shadowy trauma that cloud their soul, like who they came here to be, from shining its full expression into the world. And I'm seeing how I'm here, that's my medicine, is to guide women like this into healing themselves, firstly and foremostly, back to their soul's core, so they can discover the unique remedy that they came here to be medicine for in the world too. I'm birthing something very special for October called Invoke Your Wild Apothecary for those women who are feeling the desire to join that and want to take the tender first steps into that path. So if that is calling to you, take a look at the link in the show notes and you can find out a little bit more about the Crucible. And on to today. So the Secret Witch Show today, I dive into how magical women often have deep money fears that can prevent them from being the magical, beautiful, medicinal gifts their souls came here to be. I dive into how and why these fears often show up for the Secret Witch who doesn't yet know her power and magic, and how women can begin to alchemize these to be intimate and deeply in love with money. In this magical episode, I shared my own journey with money alchemy, and especially around creating abundance from living a soul-led life, as well as how embodying my feminine helped me in terms of creating the alchemy. I also explored the truth that how we are with money is typically how we are in life, and what money can reveal about the deeper patterns at play in our choices to live from soul. Let's dive into this juicy episode. Welcome, magical ones, to the episode called How to Lovingly Liberate Your Money Fears. And I have to say that I never thought back when I began this journey that I'd be sharing an episode about how to liberate money fears, because I was just in deep shadow around money and it really shows the level of expansion into sovereignty and power that I've had along this journey. The fact that I'm here able to share this from a really, really clean place, and I really do want to share on it in the cleanest, most honouring way possible. So this is a big episode for me, given that I've integrated a lot of shadow here. And now I can honestly say that I have a much more loving relationship with money than I did before. And this episode has been created actually because my women actually requested it after a discussion in one of my crucibles. So I put it into the vote, and then it was voted for in the group. So I knew that this episode was going to be a potent one to dive into, especially when in the group they said something about it being rare that we have a discussion in the modern world that aligns with the words money with love and soul. And right then I kind of knew how important it was to go here. So, and that the reason for that is because there's often so much fear around money. And again, it's innocent fear. I always talk about fear and shadow. The real importance in working with fear and shadow, which are essentially the same thing, is that fear just wants deep love. And that is really, really crucial to walking this path, is that we bring love to the innocence of the fears that we're experiencing. And again, money is often perhaps one of the deepest fears for my women. It's often usually the first initiation into the path when women choose to begin walking it. And it's not just a simple fear either. It's not just a small fear. Some of my women have this fear of money, and often it's a fear that can really feel like it's life and death, like they will die in facing their fears about it. And I so understand that, because I've been there. It's been part of my own journey. I've had this huge fear of money, and I was deeply, again, innocently invicting with money, with fear of not being able to create it for myself. And the fear of that meaning I was a failure, or the other fears that get triggered from this idea of money. The ideas of not being secure with money, of feeling that I couldn't earn money from being a witch, from being the full expression of myself, from living from soul, and the idea that I had to be a good girl in order to create money. And so, despite all of that, I've alchemized so much that feels really important to share, to guide you, my women, into what is possible for you. And I'll try and keep it both relevant to the journey that we're taking here, with some of the common fears that my women have, whilst also keeping it practical as well. Because again, the temptation as we begin to start talking about money, certainly in the journey that I've taken, is either to be very much in the fear, in that kind of mundane fear of it, or the opposite, swing to the opposite end of the pole and avoid it and bypass it entirely. So there's quite a practical way that I want to be with this, in the kind of loving of ourselves in that fear, loving of yourself in the fear, whilst also not entirely bypassing it, because we're human, we live in a human world, and money is something that is relevant to living in that world. And just before we do dive in, I just really want to present something that's really important to my heart, and to show the intention behind this episode, because I have intentionally based this episode a lot around the context of where my women are actually at in their journey. And many of them come to this path really struggling with, and feeling inadequate often, feeling shame around choosing into their soul work. And so I present this because it felt like this is the most helpful place to speak to where my women often are as they journey into their own healing with money, their own alchemy with money. And also because I've had those same exact fears, same exact doubts, same exact shames. And so that has been where my own alchemy has been. So I will be sharing in this episode a little bit about that. But the reason I wanted to presence that intentionally at the beginning is because I'm not doing that in a way that is here to be like, you need to choose into the path. So I really wanted to presence that, because this exploration is relevant for you no matter what the context of money. This isn't about you choosing into the path. It just so happens that that's something that is a really valuable exploration for my women. And even still, our fears are going to be the same with money, whether it's choosing an aligned action into a path towards your vision, towards your soul's vision, or choosing into spending on anything else. And that deeper fear that's present around money is the valuable piece. So the invitation is The deep invitation is into deeper intimacy with your fear around money and loving yourself in it. And that is really whether you're choosing this path or another path or whatever is aligned. There's no kind of requirement in listening to this episode that you have to choose into this path. And my heart wanted to make that so deeply clear, because it's not like an either or. It isn't like, oh, this you're here and you're struggling with money and that's stopping you from creating your soul vision and therefore this path is what you need to choose. That is not the point of this. The point is that you don't need to choose this path unless it's deeply aligned to. And it's not really even about this path. It's not really about me. It's not really about any of that. This is really an invitation for you to begin to see how money fear can get in the way over and over again of you choosing to believe in your soul vision. And that is whether this path supports you in creating your vision or not. So it was deeply important to me to presence this, because it especially isn't that you needed to choose this path to liberate your money fears. You can begin to do that with this episode, with the mini workshop especially that I offer at the end of the episode. And it's so important for me to be really clear and really clean on that whilst I share my own journey with choosing into my vision, with choosing into soul, and that of helping my own women choose into soul. Because it's really the underlying energetics that we're exploring here through that lens. And I really want you to know that that's because I've been there. I have been along this journey. These are the common fears that come up for my women. And this really is more about choosing soul, choosing what's aligned with soul. This isn't about you choosing this path. That's not what this episode is about. It isn't about me. It's about the absolute love that you can have for yourself as you go into inquiry about money, and where you can love yourself more in all the fear that arises. So there's no right or wrong. There's no me being on a pedestal with my path and you not choosing my path being wrong, because it isn't always going to be aligned for a woman to choose this path. And I work very, very cleanly with women to see if the path is something that is aligned for them or not. And if it isn't, I really won't recommend it for them, because it's not serving for anyone. And that, again, is alchemical in itself to just highlight and illuminate, because that has been such a deep part of my work. Because again, going back years ago, it would have been something that felt like it was like really difficult for me to do, is to be that impartial, be that deeply in service to women without having that fear of lack present for myself. So that's been a huge part of my work with money. It's been a huge part of my alchemy with money. And it takes a lot of money alchemy to arrive truly at this place of really serving deep soul alignment over the fear of money lack. So I see that my role is about being of deep, deep service to the world. And that means and includes being of service by knowing when it's not aligned for someone to walk this path, which I've often recommended for women. In fact, magically this morning, that was the exact conversation I was in. So I just wanted to really presence that, because, and I've said that a million times, but it's so important, because it isn't about that. This is about the deeper energetics that show up, which can often show up in that particular experience of choosing to go deeper. And it can show up in other places. So other ways that it commonly shows up for my women is that it might show up as a fear of perhaps choosing rest for yourself, because you feel that deep threat of having to work yourself to burn out to earn money. Or it might show up as a deep fear of debt, which has you control your money and not spend any money on something that your heart would love that's deeply aligned. Or it could also show up as a deep fear of not being able to create money, which has you taking no action at all or feeling powerless. And this was something, again, that showed up for me. Or it might show up in the way that you don't save any money because you have fear of having too much money, because you've got a story that money's greedy. These are all sorts of ways that fear around money can show up. And walking this path to become their medicine is one of the scenarios that money fear can surface for in my women. And it's also, as I said, where fear showed up for me that I have alchemized. So I've used that lens to really share that, because it's such a powerful and potent one for my women. And yeah, I share all of this because it's so important to go here with love and see that the wisdom here is appropriate for whatever your money fear is. And yeah, it's really, really important to know that that's where we're going. And the workshop that I'm going to be guiding you into later in the episode is so much broader. This is about, so don't just keep it focused like in your mind when you're going into that workshop. Keep in mind, this is about the deeper energetics of money. This is about your general stories about money. And talking of energetics, this is a great place to begin. So yeah, and as I begin, something that really struck me when I began to explore money, and particularly receiving money, and there's lots of different aspects that we're going to be exploring today. But one of the things that I remember seeing really, really clearly, and something that I shared in my recent Feminine Mystery Crucible, is how women and the feminine body, if we think about the feminine and her body, we are literally built to receive. And we can see that in the way that our bodies are set up to receive the masculine. So it's kind of our birthright, especially as women, to receive abundance. And what that means is, and why this is relevant, is because often money to the secret witch can really feel that quite masculine, hard energy. And this is important to know, because if we aren't embodied in our feminine, in that vulnerability of receiving, it can be hard to soften, open and receive the masculine's provisions. And this is especially true for those women who have found themselves rebelling against the masculine, as much as self-help teaches. So again, innocently, there's a lot of work with queenly embodiment that's very anti-patriarchy. And so it's really worth knowing and consciously seeing that if we are kind of biting the masculine and rejecting the masculine and working against the masculine, it's also simultaneously very difficult to receive his provisions. And money has that very, because this is, we're talking, diving deeply into energetics here, but just knowing that the energetic of the feminine is built to receive the masculine, which means that we're built to receive money, and that we don't receive it by being in our masculine, but this kind of typical way that the secret witch often comes this path by kind of that hustle, force, push. And equally, not just by completely waiting for the universe to provide it, but ultimately, the more we embody our feminine soul, the more we learn to alchemize receiving that abundance. And yeah, the art of creating money or spending money or being with money, essentially, is by being with it in alignment with soul. So that's the first lesson. That's taking you deep into the energetics, which we'll be exploring a little bit more around, and which is ultimately the kind of focus. But again, it can seem and sound a little bit woo, so I want to keep it very practical as well. But ultimately, when we tune into our hearts, tune into the deeper energetic of what's aligned from soul, and choose that around money, that is the way to be with money. And that's way oversimplified and possibly at the same time a little bit complex to try and get your head around, because there's often a lot of shadow in the way of knowing what's aligned. So we're going to be illuminating today some of the typical patterns, the typical beliefs, the typical old stories that the secret witch, who's a woman who doesn't know her power and magic, particularly with money, we're going to be exploring all of that, and we'll kind of end a little bit with a bit of a workshop to guide you into beginning to lovingly liberate your money fears as well. So I've got my crystal, my rose quartz, loving crystal, and I've actually got a banknote just in front of me as I talk about this in a really honouring, sacred way, that deep intimacy with money. And I say that because when we have fear, and we talk about this often as darkness in this path, when we have that darkness, that resistance to fear, often it can be a temptation of the secret witch to deny it, suppress it, avoid that intimacy with it. So we're going to be talking about developing, creating intimacy with money. And there are a lot of different fears that my women have based on the stories that they've created around their experience of money as a child. And my own stories, I had lots of different contrasts actually around money models. So my stories are a little bit conflicting, I have been. And Yet also, as I said, my women often tend to avoid looking to their money fears because it's so painful. So this is a big source of darkness that often many of my women have. And as I mentioned earlier as well, and it's really important to presence this because many spiritual paths often just simply bypass it, being like, well, money doesn't exist. And I've also been there in that part of the journey where it's like, well, money's just made up. So again, just bringing it back to earth, we're here as witches. We live in a world of form. The witch is very much in her body. She's a manifester into form. It's really important that we don't bypass it. So it's important to go into that deep intimacy with money, with our stories around money, and begin to love ourselves there. And that really is the first step into healing, by really developing intimacy with our money fears and our money in general, rather than avoiding going there. So it's really important to be creating this episode so beautifully suggested by our women. And yes, such a taboo topic in so many ways in our culture, so it's really perfect for the witch to begin to liberate. And again, just to take it back to the witch wound, because I always like to do that, the witch wound really makes sense of why our women, particularly witches, particularly magical ones, fear money. It makes so much sense because if you think about the witch, she literally could not make money from her gifts, from her healing powers. If she tried to, she'd have been burned at the stake. So for so many magical and medicinal ones who are here to become their own healing remedy in the world and ripple out their medicine and create abundance through that, it's a really, really common fear, money, that is deeply ingrained into our very DNA. If we think about epigenetics and how epigenetics is about how what we live through literally changes our DNA, that story of like not being able to earn money from our healing powers, which is a common fear of the secret ritual, they manifest in so many different ways, these money fears, it's literally ingrained in their cells, in their bodies. So it makes perfect sense. If you're a secret witch, if you're a magical one, there's always going to be some form of shadow, whether it's small or whether it's large. There's always going to be some kind of fear around money. And again, what I've learned mostly is that while I will talk to money today, because it's important not to bypass it, as I mentioned, is that mostly as we deepen into kind of liberating that shadow around money, it's actually never really about the money. There's always usually some sort of deeper fear that money is representing, that often we bring in as a distraction. And so it's important to begin to understand what those deeper patterns are. And I say this and we look at this in terms of money, because how we are in money is how we are in life. So money is really one lens that we can dive into to begin to see the deeper patterns that are at play in our lives. I'm trying to think if there's an example I have of that. I think there's something around like being in control. So for me, being in control of my money represented how I was really wanting to be in control shadow in all areas of my life. And that showed up by me not letting go of control with my relationships. Like I would always be the leader. And the more I've sunk into my feminine, the capacity to be led, the capacity to receive, the more I have alchemized that control shadow. And that has shown up in my manifestation of money. My manifestation of money has been entirely different from the alchemy of those stories. And so, yeah, how we are in money often is kind of how we are in life. And it's innocent. I can't say this enough, is that we've learned these patterns innocently both on our little girl that's learned them, and innocently in terms of, the patterns that have been passed down, because they've also been learned from childhood. And we've learned these patterns in childhood that show up in our relationship with money, as well as our relationships with everything else. So there's a deeper energetic that is usually creating our stories and our relationships with money. And often, for the secret witch who doesn't know her power and magic, it often comes down to the deeper fear of money is something around the doubt of her power, or the fear of being too powerful, or doubt of her magic or her fear of being magical, and her unworthiness as well of investing in herself, or her unworthiness of money in general. So these are common things that show up for my women, and often particularly when she thinks about kind of walking deeper and deeper into the path, she will use money as a block to choosing herself fully, to choosing being in her full expression, by either sabotaging having money or saving her money because she's too scared to invest in herself. And I have been there completely. And so the most important thing for you to begin to do as a secret witch who doesn't yet know her power and magic with money, who isn't yet in that energetic of abundance, and I say yet because this is something that we can learn to cultivate, is to begin to love yourself there, so you can see more about the patterns that are keeping you in an energetic of fear rather than an energetic of love and abundance. But the key point of that, as I always say, is loving yourself in the fear. That is the deepest medicine that we can offer ourselves. So love is part of the alchemy. Without love, we are not going to be able to access the deeper patterns at play. We're not going to be able to see them. We're not going to be able to illuminate them. And that is key to the alchemy. And recently I've begun to talk a lot about the remedies of the wild. Now these are essentially the remedies in nature that hold energetic medicine. They have energetic patterns that we can use to really illuminate where we are in shadow. And so I was thinking about, as I began to plan this episode, what is the energetic medicine that shows up around money? And when I think about the remedy of the wild that has deep, deep money shadow contained within it, that's kind of activating as we begin to work with this remedy, begin to invoke it, is I think of arsenicum, which essentially is a toxic poison, which shows you the level of feeling and emotion that my women can often feel about the subject of money. There's that kind of deep energetic of fear that is often unsettling, and I know it well because I have been there. And also, just as a bit of context, my women are often deeply constitutionally phosphoric. That's who they were born as. They have this deep sensitivity. They are magical. They've got this burning desire. Phosphorus is what's on the end of a match typically, but they've got this burning desire to be their gift in the world, and usually that is to become a healing remedy for the world. And the reason I presence this is because arsenicum as a remedy has a close link to phosphorus. It is in the same kind of groupings as phosphorus, which you don't really need to understand deeply right now, but I bring it in because the whole purpose of this work is to return to our constitution of phosphorus with the knowing of the unique remedy that we've actually come here to be medicine for in the world. And arsenicum as a remedy is one of those kind of remedies. If we think of an onion, phosphorus is who we are at our core, and then we're wrapped in layers of trauma, and that can be trauma with a capital T or it can be trauma with a lowercase t. But essentially, money fear, money trauma is one of those layers that is in the way of you being that constitutional phosphorus that you were born as, that who your soul came here to be, that deeply sensitive, deeply magical, one with a burning desire to be that healing remedy for the world. And that's often, again, that's who I am, that's who my women are. What often happens is that my women can go into this arsenicum state, and then the shadow state, and then their soul gets layered over with this shadow fear about money, and that sabotages their journey to being who they are. Because arsenicum, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. Arsenicum doesn't trust anyone to not poison them. And this is often, again, one of the deep fears that my women will have as they begin to step into this path. That particularly around money, there can be this real lack of trust. And I presence this again with complete love because, again, this is something that I've experienced myself. And it's because arsenicum as a remedy state, as a shadow state, fears insecurity. They feel insecure. They see the world as unsafe, threatening, chaotic. They feel weak and unpowerful. They feel like they can't trust people. They feel maybe that their guide is only interested in money. And they can, that kind of often puts women into a state where they will not trust my leadership, which again, I have complete love for my women when they're in this state. And it's really helpful to illuminate that is them being in an arsenicum state, so that you can then begin to alchemize that arsenicum state by dosing that remedy and loving yourself in it and moving through it, choosing to move through it. So often arsenicum people can feel, women who are in an arsenicum state, let's say, often they are mistrustful, suspicious, cautious, anxious about money. And also, not just money, relationships, health, all sorts of things. If you remember how I said was how we are in money is how we are in life. And this is ultimately, bless her heart, because arsenicum has learned that she is not safe, that she's not in control, that she's not powerful. And she's gone, therefore, this has put her, this belief, this old story, has put her into this toxic, wounded state, which manifests in her experience with money. And then she'll try to mask over this state by taking control, which is what has her pop out of her magic and straight into control shadow. So she'll deny her magic because of this deep need to stay safe, to stay in control of money. And from there, what usually happens is she will just end up living in the mundane world, denying her magic because of fear, and usually burning out. Again, this arsenicum state is a trapped energy of love of her soul, just being her full expression. So this arsenicum layer masks over that full expression by having her use all her energy being in fear. And that is what has her innocently avoiding the very gift, the very medicine she came here to be. And having said all of that, and if you've worked with me in any of my crucibles, you'll begin to see that what this remedy and the illumination of this remedy offers as we begin to invoke its spirit is that if we choose into the healing of this remedy, if we choose past the fear, as I did in my own journey, as many of my clients do continuously, there is a deep gold available in the alchemy of this remedy of the wild for my deeply sensitive, magical women. And if my women choose into the alchemy of arsenicum, the arsenicum remedy of the wild, they can alchemize this into a deep trust of their souls so that they can become their healing medicine in the world. They can create deep abundance in their lives. And the poison becomes alchemized into gold, quite literally. And again, I share this because this is how we work with these remedies of the wild on this path. We use them as alchemical catalysts, essentially, to go into the shadows and learn to heal and alchemize them into gold. And I'm going to be leading women into the tender first steps of this journey with the remedies of the wild in October. This is my new philosophy starting to come into my work, starting to infuse into my work. I've been really deep in the work of distilling my medicinal philosophy of the remedies of the wild recently, and so I'll be leading women into invoke your wild apothecary so that they can become their healing medicine by dosing themselves with these remedies of the wild. So if you're interested in healing that way, then the invitation is to register your interest on our Wild Alchemy Crucibles page. So just as a side, if that's something that you're feeling drawn to, if you're coming alive in this kind of description of arsenicum and phosphorus, that might be something as a little kind of tender first step into the path. It's an initial initiation, that's a tongue twister, into the work that we do here in this path. So to share a little bit more, I wanted to share my own journey with this because I am essentially a phosphoric witch. as my women are. And I, of course, therefore had a burning desire to be my medicine, to create a business. And I also had this arsenicum layer that was obscuring me from being in that ancient medicinal truth of my soul that I was just expressing to you. So this kind of money fear, this arsenicum shadow, was really having me not be in the fullness of who I came here to be, which was essentially to guide magical ones into their souls, into being their medicine, both for themselves and later on for the world. So that's a newer development, but I have been self-employed for about a decade now, and in my early years I see now, following some really deep work in this alchemy for a few years, that I really used to place a value on my worth. I used to really be in this story of other people's choices being very much about me, that when women would say no to me and my crucibles, that meant something about me. And yet, what I've come to see through this alchemy is that what it actually means is that they're saying no to themselves, because that deep fear is always of them choosing themselves. And the way that I began to see this impacted everything. And I really had this story that I couldn't create money. So I was deeply, deeply in fear. And I think back to, there's this one moment, this real pivotal moment. I got goosebumps thinking about it, where I was just deeply in fear. And yeah, it was like, yeah, it impacted this fear impacted everything in the early days. And I kind of right from the way of like enrolling women, I hated exploration calls, which I absolutely love now. Like, they're the best thing ever. I'd really avoid intimate conversations about both my money fears and my women's money fears, because I was in such deep fear myself. That would leave us both going round and round in money fear, and inevitably from that place, I created that no one chose in. I created the very story that I was believing, that I couldn't create money and that I couldn't even serve them even if they did. And I made it all about my worthiness, all about my thinking as well, that I needed money. I was in this deep place of lack of abundance. And even more deeply, that energetic was not even about me being in service to my women. That wasn't even, when I first started my business, that wasn't even present. It was one of like really feeling that need for money. And so I either, as I mentioned, operated in the shadow pole of being either in my mundane fears about not having enough money, or swinging to the opposite end of the shadow pole to evading and bypassing money completely. And there were all sorts of old stories. I remember one of them was about not being part of the elite. There were all sorts of stories that played, and we're going to go into that a little bit more in a little while. But as I began to look at these fears and stories, I began to love myself in the innocence of how they'd been created. That all began to shift, and there's been a lot of work that I've done in this particular area. And I began to see, as I illuminated, as I loved myself, I began to see that what my work was actually about was being in deep service. And I began to see as well that my women's choices were nothing about me and all about them and their choosing of themselves, their investing in themselves. And I also saw that for some of us who are magical ones, to really that are here to really play energetically big and be of the deepest service, we also require to take up space and to create abundance in order to expand into our fullness. There was a sense of like it being, I want to say, like not allowed or disapproved of if we created money from living from soul. And so I really began to see that story differently as well. It's like there was this story of like, you can either have money or you can have soul, but you can't have both. And so I began to see that for those of us who are leaders, who are here to play energetically big and be of that deep service, we also require to take up space and create abundance in order to expand into our fullness. So for example, I required abundance in order to hire a support team that helps us to serve our women and be our medicine. So think of like Tony Robbins as the example that someone gave to me, my own soul guide gave to me. Think of Tony Robbins trying to create, it's like if he hadn't got what he has, he couldn't create the level of impact he has created in the world. So think about him trying to create his impact on the world without his jet plane, for example. It's just not going to work because he jets all over the world. And so yeah, we are for those of us who are magical ones, meant to be here to play energetically big and be of deep service in the world, which phosphoric women generally are. They're here to play big. That includes abundance. We are here for that abundance. So there is absolutely, money and soul do go together. And again, I only saw all of this by going deeply into the fears that showed up and loving myself in my own fears. And I remember just going back to being in that moment of like that fear, that deep fear that I talked about. I remember one day being in this fear of not being able to create money, which again is a common fear of the secret witch who doesn't know her own power and magic, and particularly in creating money from her gifts. I just remember, I'm just closing my eyes as I remember it, just sitting here feeling into the energetic of just the deep despair, sadness, like fear, just terror actually, of just that story of thinking that I couldn't create what I wanted to create. And I sat with one of my own soul guides for an hour sobbing my eyes out, and he just sat there silently, just letting me sob and not rescuing me. And I remember that being such an unusual feeling back then. And it was all because it was time for me to renew or to sign up to my work with them. And I was in so much fear about not being able to create the money in order to pay them. And yeah, I just remember feeling so deeply sad about this, and just feeling like it just wasn't possible to continue. Like I just couldn't choose into continuing my soul work, and I felt like that was the end of the world, because it's something that I wanted, that burning desire in me, that phosphoric burning desire, just could not imagine not continuing my soul work. And I literally felt that arsenic and death grip of fear around money, and I projected in that all sorts of stuff onto my guides, that they didn't love me, that their path was a scam, that I couldn't do it. And they just held me in love whilst not rescuing me and pointing out where I was in shadow. And the power in that was immense. The power in having a guide that is not going to rescue you, but is going to point you to where you're in shadow, to where you can expand in that circumstance, is something I'm so incredibly appreciative of, because in that moment I had never seen that I could energetically choose into a new story, that it was me that was choosing what I was available for. Am I available for creating from these old stories that really were coming up as material for liberation, for me to expand past or choose into expanding past? Or was I available, even though I didn't know how and I had no idea how I was going to create this, was I available to create it? Even though it looked impossible, even though I've got no idea how I'd create the money to pay them. But what I did see, and that was absolute alchemical gold that has gone on to form the foundation of all of my deeper choices into soul, what I did see was that I still could choose it regardless. And again, it's that liberation of that control shadow. Like, we can choose energetically that this is happening. This is what we're going to do. We can choose out of our fear. We can choose into a new story. And more deeply, even more deeply than money, the deeper choice was I could choose to live and create from soul despite my fears. And so in that moment, it was a really alchemical moment. I remember it so deeply well. So it was such a poignant moment, such an important moment, such a milestone in my journey, that I just remember all of the energetic of all of it. And yeah, in that moment, my control shadow was liberated by leaning into trust, not in a bypassy way of ignoring money, but in a way of like really backing myself and my power and choosing into that new story of like, I am a powerful creator, to actually become my medicine and ripple that out into the world. And it was in that deeper choice to live from soul, to not be available for the fears that stop us from living from soul, that so much alchemy was created. And again, that vision wasn't really even about money at that point. It was like the deeper choice of living from soul, which encompassed abundance, and living from soul was that deeper choice. And I saw all of my old stories. Well, I mean, all of them's a bit extreme. I saw so many of my old stories and loved myself in them, and I chose energetically out of them. And that may sound a little bit woo to some people, to the women who aren't there yet. And it takes some time journeying to be able to get to the point where you actually grasp what that looks like, what that feels like. But there are some practical steps that I'm going to share with you as well to help you begin to get to that point. But I share it because I want you to know that I have been there in this fear about money, that I have felt the pains of having that burning desire that you really think it is impossible, and that I have also alchemized it and can guide you into doing the same. And that deeper energetic choice, that deep shadow work, has opened me up to living my true soul will and creating abundance from there. I've literally liberated myself from that fear, and I continue to do so as fear arises. So to get really clean on many fears whenever they arise. And what I've seen from that is that there is no greater gift than actually becoming our medicine in the world. The living of life from soul is the energetic that we create all of our desires from. So it's the choosing of the living from soul and liberating all the fears and patterns in the way of that, i.e. money, which has us actually naturally create all of the abundance that our heart desires. And this way of being in the world, this kind of magical medicinal way, is so rare in this world. By being in deep service of that, naturally abundance follows. It's so needed by the world, which is stuck in this mundane way of being rather than the magical lens. So you also shining your heart and soul into the world in this way, by embodying that medicine for yourself first and then becoming it in the world, rippling it out into the world, that will naturally bring you abundance by living from soul. And it reminds me of a quote by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and she said, "One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. Struggling souls catch light from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it." And that just reminds me of the deep, deep gift in us being our medicine. And that really is the real gift of this, that kind of energetic learning that our work is to live from being of deep service, from being the truth of our souls and expressing from there. And people can either choose into our unique remedy from there or not. And that's really important to know, because now I'm really seeing so deeply that the most important thing in all of this is calling in the aligned women who are going to be committed to becoming their own medicine in the world and serving them deeply, because that looks very different now. And this is particularly related to those of my women who are beginning to ripple their medicine out into the world. So it looks very different, because my work is no longer about just getting money to survive. That was an old story that has been alchemized so that my work is pure and clean, and purely and cleanly about helping aligned magical ones to become their own healing remedy and then dose that out into the world to make those ripples that will literally change the world. So my focus shifted in this alchemy from being like, I'm in lack, I need to make money, into being of deep, deep service in order to change the world. And there's a real different energetic, there's a real different feeling of wholeness in that. And it's so magical to be creating from that place instead. And it's very hard to make money when you don't have a vision of who you want to be in the world and how you long to be of service to it. And that is really a core learning. And it's also something that my women feel now, that they feel the difference in the energetic of like them making a difference to the world. And yeah, I also openly explore money fears with complete love. I help women choose what's aligned for them, even if that means not working with me. I'm just of deep service to them being their medicine, whether they want to work with me, whether they don't, whether they're ready to work with me, whether they're not. I am always here to be of service to them in becoming their medicine, whatever that looks like. So I absolutely adore my alchemy calls now, because it just has a completely different energetic of pure love, of cleanness, of helping women to move on in being, in healing themselves firstly, which is of the utmost importance to the world, but also in rippling their medicine out into the world as well. And I know from this place, their choices are never about me. Their choices are their own fears or their incapacity to choose through fear, and the level of the capacity that they have to choose past them and liberate them. And that includes the big fear of investing in themselves. And I love them so deeply in the dance that they do around money, because I have danced the exact same dance in exactly the same place, and I know the gold available in them being in that place. And again, I share this because it's so relevant for my women in the fears that they have, not only in choosing into their soul work, but just in general in choosing into how they spend money, how they are with money, how they're being with money. But because that has been kind of focused around them becoming their medicine for themselves and others, let's go back to basics, because I really want to keep this episode relatable to where my women are. And that's usually in some kind of deep fear around money that wants deeply loving intimacy. So I'm going to share with you some of the ways that this shows up in my women, and that is specific in some areas to them wanting to earn money from soul. And it's also just generally day to day their experience of how they feel about money. So there's kind of a mixture of the two, which ultimately are pretty much the same thing. So as I said, how we are in money is how we are in life. So as we begin to illuminate your patterns, you may start to notice that these old stories are showing up in all sorts of places, and how this fear particularly shows up. And I've taken this mostly from a discussion with some of my women, how this mostly shows up and how my women may feel is all of the following. So often my women will feel very powerless, and again I've taken this from both my women's experience and my own experience. So often they'll feel deeply powerless to create money, and they can also feel that it's unrealistic that they can earn money. They'll often feel that they have to sell their souls to earn money. There's this kind of dichotomy that we mentioned of money versus soul. Like you can have either money or you can have soul. That's a huge one that comes up for my women. They will often feel that they don't deserve and aren't worthy of money. That's a really deep one that goes often a few layers back. Often you won't spot that story immediately. It might show up and manifest in a certain way that you have to dig a little bit deeper to see that one. And that one can often be the root fear with money. And yeah, and what I mean by that is it may show up in a different way. I'm trying to think of an example. Like you'll avoid spending money until you do a little bit of digging and see that it's actually a deeper fear of not being worthy. They might also feel that spending money is self-indulgent, is greedy, especially if they're spending on soul. This is one that often has my women not choose into crucibles. And so yeah, there's this kind of feeling of being self-indulgent, greedy, selfish if they spend money on, particularly on soul. Comes back to that dichotomy of money versus soul. They can also feel ashamed of how they've managed their money in the past. They can kind of beat themselves up for mistakes that they've made on spending money or trusting people with money or whatever it is, where they've kind of created some scenario where they've had a bad experience with money. They can also feel that earning money is self-indulgent, especially earning from soul. Like, that's a luxury that people shouldn't have, or they shouldn't have. They're probably okay with other people having it, although they may well be a little bit triggered by other people having it, but may well feel that it's self-indulgent for themselves to do that. They also often feel that they can't choose to be their medicine because of a lack of money. Again, not seeing that them choosing to be their medicine is an investment in their soul. And yeah, there's also often a story that if they create money, they won't be loved, which again is another powerful story, that if we think that we will lose love from having money, that's going to have us create a lack of money, because there's absolutely no way, without consciously seeing that story. And again, this is one that can often be hidden. They often will see that if they create money, they will lose love. That is one that is a big one that will have my women intentionally spend all their money and not have enough for whatever they want, because if they have enough, then they won't be loved. Again, another one that deeply wants love there and can be deeply hidden. They may also feel that they lack control over money, and therefore that they have to micromanage or control their money tightly because it looks really linear. And this was a big one for me. Like, I really was in this kind of story of having to control my money tightly. And there's something, actually, I've just reminded myself of a story particularly about unworthiness. I remember my dad left when I was 4, and I always talk about the stories that I created around that, because one of the big ones that led me to have that story of being unworthy of money, which is another way that my women can often feel, which we talked about earlier. One of the big ones is my dad never paid his maintenance, and I somehow made that in my mind to be that I was unworthy of money, and that is where I created that kind of worthiness story, and making it very much around me being worthy if people paid me. So that was a huge one to illuminate. What else? So other ways that my women might feel about money is that they're dependent on the masculine for money and therefore powerless. That's another big story that often comes up, especially if many of my women are often supported by their husbands as well, and there can be that real resistance to being provided for by the masculine. So again, another story that it may well be that that's really a beautiful provision from the masculine. And yeah, another one that commonly comes up, that kind of, again, I guess kind of a sense of approval, which is coming to my next one. So often, again, my women will feel that people won't approve of their choices about money in general, but also their choice to create money. So again, coming from a soul work angle, particularly if there's a way of creating money from being the full expression of your soul, again, like when there's approval shadow around being your expression of soul, it makes sense that is then really edgy to think that you could create money from it. So even the very basic story of like, people won't approve of me being a witch, how am I meant to make money from that? Like, that is going to feel super edgy. And again, another way that this can show up for my women is often they've unconsciously spent their money on healing modalities that haven't helped. And so they'll have this kind of doubt of spending money, again, often because the previous work they've done lacks that deep shadow work, and they've kind of unconsciously spent all their money. So essentially what I'm pointing to here is there can be a lot of shame around money and about their choices of how they've spent money in the past that shows up for my women when they're in money fear, money shadow. And again, another one that shows up is that my women can fear taking responsibility for their money. This is another big one, in that that there's often that kind of deeper fear. And again, it can really look hidden if we've been kind of rescued with money, which again is another pattern of mine. There can also be that fear of taking responsibility to cultivate and create that money yourself, because what will you lose? What benefits will you lose in doing so? So it's another one that again is deeply often unconscious. Again, another one that shows up, another fear, is that our nervous systems can't even take thinking about money. And if this is you, then you've done really, really well to sit here and listen to 48 minutes of me talking about money. So celebrating you for that one. But yeah, there's a deep fear, because there's such a deep kind of ingrained really almost death-like fear of money in my women. There's often that kind of activation of the nervous system, and so there's a fear as well that the nervous system just can't take it. And then another way that it shows up is in the shutting down of possibility to create money in magical ways. It's not taught that we can create money magically from love and soul, and that really is the importance of this work. And then another one, just to complete on how this shows up for my women, is that it can also distract from money. Like again, that kind of bypassing, like it's really too hard to face. So I'll just ignore money, leave it over there, which is why I'm beautifully, luxuriously feeling the notes in my hand as I'm recording this episode, really deepening into that intimacy with money. And the importance of seeing this, that you will feel like you're no longer alone, because this is how everybody that's a secret witch feels, pretty much. And there's a deep importance in seeing this is a collective secret witch thing. You're not alone. And being able to really love yourselves in these stories, like you're not alone. This is a collective thing that other people feel as well, and they're innocent stories. There's all sorts of stories, and this isn't all of them. There may be unique stories that you can recognize, and it's important to see that these old stories, are particularly important for my women to notice, because they're very important reason why this is so important to illuminate is because my women are witches, and witches manifest whatever they are thinking, whatever they're believing. So my women who are witches are creating their lives powerfully, usually unconsciously, from these stories. So our work here in this path is to begin to make the unconscious conscious, so that you can actually choose your focus on what you want to create. You're creating anyway. Women who are witches are magical ones. They are creating their lives powerfully from whatever stories they are holding, whether they're unconscious fears, or with their conscious beliefs. So what our work is here is to begin to illuminate with love where these old stories, these shadows, are unconsciously creating for you, so that you can begin to notice them doing so and begin to choose differently, choosing into intimacy with money initially as that very first step, so that more can be revealed to you, so that you can begin to see the new stories that want to be embodied. So all of that said, and again, we're going to just go into a little bit of a workshop here in order to begin that work, because it's such an important way of working with this. So firstly, I'm just going to invite you to just get back into your body. We've been listening to this, probably the temptation of the secret, which is to intellectualize everything. So probably been trying to intellectualize it. So just consciously sink into your body, whatever that looks like. So maybe sit on the floor, grab a blanket, really ground into your body. Just start to notice your body, maybe stroke your body, just bring yourself back to it. Breathe. Now sigh. Just beginning to let your nervous system know that it is safe. That these are old stories that we're going to illuminate, not truth. And just begin to breathe deeply into your body for a count of 4. Inhaling for a count of 4. Holding for a count of 4, holding your breath. And then exhaling for a count of 8. And we'll do this a few times whilst also just stroking our body. Stroking your skin, noticing the sensation of your skin, noticing how you can make your body feel safe. You have the power. In your mind, just letting your body know that it's safe to go where we're going to go. Breathing in, inhaling for 4. Holding for 4. Exhaling for 8. Inhaling for 4. Holding for 4. And exhaling for 8. Inhaling for 4. Holding for 4. And exhaling for 8. Just letting your body know it is safe. And I'm just presencing that in this kind of mini workshop that we're just going into, I'm just going to be asking you some questions to reflect. We're here to liberate our many fears, which involves firstly tending our nervous system, loving yourselves in your stories, in the innocence of them, and opening your hearts to see more, to allow what wants to be revealed to be revealed. And I'll ask you some questions to help you illuminate what stories you hold about money. So notice whatever surfaces with love. It may be that you see exactly the stories that have been keeping you stuck in that feeling of fear. It may be that you see like images, and maybe it's you words that come to you, maybe full sentences. So just allow your experience however that shows up. Again, you may wish to either just be with this inquiry, or may wish to grab a journal and pen and make notes. You might wish to pause. I'm just going to ask you some powerful questions that will help you begin to illuminate all the stories that you hold about money. So the first question is, what are your deep fears around money? And let whatever comes to you come. Often these fears will be either control, security, or approval. So which one sums up how you're being with money? Are you trying to over control it? Do you under control it? Are you feeling insecure and unsafe? Do you spend it unconsciously, meaning that you have nothing left each month? Do you fear approval of spending or earning money? What are the deep fears? And when you've answered that, think of an early experience from childhood that you remember where money was involved, and just witness what was the story that played out. Like the one I described about my dad not paying maintenance, where I created that there was some sort of worthiness tied into that. Again, you might want to pause if you want to spend more time on the inquiries, but I'm just going to read them out so that you can either maybe note them down and then revisit them after we've completed, or whatever. feels aligned? What stories did you learn from childhood about money in general? What stories did your mum hold or tell you about money? What stories did your dad hold or tell you about money? What common cultural stories have you been told about money? For example, there's a common cultural story of money doesn't grow on trees, which, if we hold that within our bodies as truth, can really impact the way that we manifest with money. What stories did you create yourself about money from all of this? And the deeper question, what have these stories had you create with money? For example, if you believed that money was frittered and didn't grow on trees, have you gone into being over controlling with money to prevent that? Which again is one from my own experience. And these questions have you deeply begin to elevate from being in your stories. Like, if you can begin to see them, you're elevated enough to be beyond them. And so the deep invitation is to simply notice that these are old, outdated stories. The deep work is to love yourself in the innocence of this creation, whilst also noticing where these stories are creating for you with money. Where are you gripping too tightly or frittering money unconsciously, and really love yourself in those innocently learned patterns, and begin to know from this place there is a new way possible, even if you can't see how. One of initially becoming more intimate with money and your money fears, and then choose consciously. Is deepening into intimacy with money something that you actually want to liberate? And to do that, to know that, even what are the costs and benefits of being in deep intimacy with money versus choosing into a new way of being in deep intimacy. So it's the deep invitation is to look there. And if you choose and you do wish to find a new way of being in deep intimacy with money, there's some really practical ways that you can begin to work with liberating this avoidance of intimacy with money. And again, this is about making that deeper choice into intimacy. And I recommend 5 ways that you can begin to do that. So I'm going to just tell you about those before we complete. So one of the ways that you can begin this that I've found really potent is by placing money in my vision, so that I'm literally faced with it. I have it on my vision board. So it's really hard for us to be in intimacy with money these days, where we once would have been in kind of more ancient days. I guess more ancient days, actually, money was an exchange. So they would have been kind of exchanging sheep and cows. But we used to handle money a lot more frequently. And so these days, we literally just transfer everything online or pay by card. So it's difficult to have a visual relationship with it. So again, I've been holding my notes as we move through this episode, because it's really great to have that visual texture. Is that even a word? It's like the texture of it. You can really feel that sensual experience with money, that deep intimacy. So I keep mine on my vision board as that reminder and that way of honouring money, becoming intimate with it. So that's one really great way to begin to liberate that intimacy with money. Another way is to really get into habit of noticing the new stories that want to emerge around money. Noticing, for example, when you have created money that was unexpected. And I remember I always used to manifest lots of big and little things even before I walked this path. So I remember in 1 week once I manifested a free laptop, a free £3,000 bed, and free donuts all in 1 week. So I kept a note of these manifestations. This is something I often invite my women into, actually. is keeping a note of what they are creating, what they are manifesting. So keep a note of all the things that you have created, especially since you're beginning to notice what new stories want to be created around money. So something like an abundance journal is another way to deepen into your relationship with money. A third way is spending time in deep appreciation of money and what you've created and what you've spent consciously. So when you're spending and transferring money, be very practical with giving appreciation to money, with having that deep sacred honouring of money, that energetic honouring of money as you either pay or as you transfer the money, and see that it is your creation, that you have it in your account in order to pay or transfer. So again, just being in that energetic of appreciating money is a very practical way that we can begin to deepen into intimacy with it. Another way, and this was something I think I learned ages back from Genevieve Davis, and again at the time, because it was just in isolation, it wasn't something that had that deep shadow work with it, it didn't feel that relevant. But now I can see the real power in this, given the alignment with the deep work. So this is about having, and I've set the intention actually to recreate this with the Monzo accounts, which are really, really good for this. But essentially, it can be really, really helpful to create different pots of money. So you might have one for spending, one for saving, one for self-nurture, one for charity, one for paying back debt, if that's relevant, and contribute to them monthly. So even if that's a small amount, like £2.50 in each pot, then that is the deeper energetic of this that is important. There's a real power in beginning to organise your accounts in this way, to create this in a way that feels aligned for your soul. There's a real power in the energetic of being intimate with money in that way. And then finally, we wouldn't be even on this path if we didn't talk about creating a soul vision. So the final invitation to get really kind of practical in intimacy is to really allow yourself to go in and create a vision. What are your deep soul hopes and dreams around money? What relationship do you long to create with money, even if that feels impossible? What feeling do you long to have about money? How would you feel if you were in abundance? And how might you like to create money, if that is soul work relevant? So all of those things are so important. It's such deep work. And just before I was sharing this episode, actually, one of my clients who had deep money fears messaged me to say that she created 3 times the amount of money she desired to work with me. And the day before, she really felt that it wasn't possible to choose, but she did choose, and it was from the energetic choosing that she created it. So that was magical timing. Just as I was about to record this, that was created in that way. So that just shows you that being in love with money and like really choosing into that energetic of being open to creating from soul, and more importantly, being in that magical creation from deep soul alignment, it means that anything is possible when we allow ourselves to go into the alchemy of it all. And it really is. It's a completely different way of creating to the kind of more mundane way of creating. And I'm so appreciative of the journey that I've been on with this, because I was deep in shadow. And now I can honestly say that I'm falling in deep love with money. It still feels a little edgy to say that, but it's becoming truer and truer each day, because I've created so many of my impossible milestones, impossible seeming milestones in my business. And I'm not going to share them, because really, although this whole episode has been about money, the deeper beauty of this alchemy is really the coming to live fully from soul. And I've shared that in a blog I wrote actually about money recently, which I'll put the link to in the show notes, about how I had actually even forgotten to celebrate my milestone of a 5-figure month because I was just so deeply ingrained in living from soul that the figure itself actually didn't even matter to me anymore. And I say that because once to have that kind of milestone would have just felt like A, impossible, and B, just like such a massive thing, from this place of like being in real shadow of money. And instead of like being kind of elated about the money, I was really purely just in the moment of living from soul and completely forgot to even tell my soul guide that had happened. And that really shows you that the living from soul is the most important thing. Like, I was so deeply in living from soul that the figure itself didn't even matter to me as much anymore. And of course, in a way that's deeply honouring, I did spot that and then say to my soul guide, oh my goodness, I've hit this milestone without even realising. And she just replied back saying, who even are you? So that's how much of a shift it has been. But living from soul is the medicine for all of it. And it is the most important thing. The money really is an additional kind of bonus, and that might feel triggering to hear me take up this space around money, particularly if you're in that money shadow, but that's good because it's the truth. It's the material for your liberation. It's what you've called in order to be able to move through this and see it the same way. So that shows you that the same is available for you too if you choose it that way. And that starts, as I've mentioned, with loving ourselves, opening your hearts to magical creation. And again, just a reminder that you can begin this work yourself. It isn't that you need, just to bring it back to what I said at the beginning, it isn't that you need this path to liberate your fears. The deep work is yours, and you can really choose to do that at your own pace. Again, the reason I create this podcast is for that exact purpose, so that women can journey in their own way if that is aligned for them. And the workshop I've offered here is so powerful for you to begin taking those tender first steps into that deep work yourself. And I really mean that. Like, do not underestimate the power within that illumination in that workshop. That is so potent. And I really mean that truly. Like, I offer this podcast as a way of helping and serving my women walk the path so that there are supportive tools to them that mean they can still choose this work wherever they are, and to choose to begin to love themselves in their fear. So this absolutely does not mean that you need to choose into. When I say choose, you do not need to choose into this path. You do not need to choose into going deeper. Of course, the advantage of having a soul guide, if that is aligned for you to choose, is essentially that you can collapse time on creating your vision. You will get to create your vision faster. You'll have that deeper journey that's very bespoke to you in creating your vision, your unique vision, and you'll have the ongoing support in whatever arises along that journey. But it is absolutely possible and deeply important for me to let you know that you can go into this work yourself. If that is aligned for you and where you are, it's really important you know that that is absolutely perfect. And it's part of me being in deep service to offer it in this way. And I really, again, just wanted to presence that because it's so important to me that this episode, particularly around money, is clean of shadow and full of love and accessibility. That was a big episode. So I'm going to leave it there and love you in all that has surfaced during this episode. I would love to hear what this has brought alive for you. So please join us in the Secret Witch Circle Facebook group, or email me info@nicolebarton.co.uk. I'd love to hear what you take away from this episode. Please do share. Please join our group if you wish to. There's a beautiful community in there. And anyway, I will see you very soon. Catch you in a fortnight. Well, that was a juicy episode, wasn't it? I think it was one of my favourites so far. So, here are my takeaways. Money is a common fear of the secret witch who doesn't know her power and magic. And it is important not to bypass this fear, but to look at it directly with love so that the fears can begin to be alchemized. How we are with money is typically how we are in life. Our fear is often not really about the money, but the underlying patterns, which can often be control, approval, or security based. The remedy of the wild, arsenicum, can help my phosphoric women to unravel the layers of money trauma that allow them to be back in the full expression of their soul and who they came here to be, which is magical, sensitive women who have come here with a burning desire to create something. Money can often feel very masculine and hard, and as women, we are built to receive the masculine. But it takes us to soften, open, and receive the masculine in order to receive his provisions fully. The more we can embody our feminine, the easier our relationship with money will be. Choosing to create abundance is really a deeper energetic choice into a new story. We do this by lovingly illuminating our old stories and noticing them until we can look at money from a place of love and feel that money from a place of love and create it from alignment with soul. And it is possible to be in love with money. The first step is choosing to deepen into intimacy with money. There are some really powerful, practical ways to do this via the Noticing Inquiry in the Money workshop in this episode, and also the 5 practices offered. Enjoy. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.